Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another NetHope Solutions Center webinar. Today, we welcome ID 2020 and Microsoft to speak about digital identity in the humanitarian space. Before we get started, let's go over a few housekeeping guidelines. We'd like everyone to keep this an interactive session. Please post your questions in the WebEx chat window for a Q&A discussion toward the end of our session today. We also will be following up with all attendees by sending an email that includes the recording and collateral for today's webinar, and it will be posted on the NetHope Solutions Center as well. And at the end of this session, we would be very appreciative if you would respond to our webinar satisfaction poll so that we can get your feedback and improve the webinar series. And with that, I will hand off to my colleague Layla Toplik for speaker introductions. Layla?
Thank you, Madeline. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon. It is my pleasure to host a discussion on this topic of identity on behalf of the NetHope community. Identity, as many of you know, is one of those unique topics that matters to every human being on the planet. And pretty much everything we do as the NetHope community, it is central to all development problems. In fact, according to the UN, 10 out of 17 Sustainable Development Goals need a coherent identity solution in order to be achieved. And this is not the first time NetHope community is talking about identity. Just recently at NetHope Summit, we had a discussion with Microsoft, Mercy Corps, Accenture, and Midyar about good identity, what it is, what it will take to make good identity possible, including the role of all of you, the nonprofit sector. And there is a recap of the discussion on the NetHope website, which Madeline will be sharing. In this specific discussion, Microsoft will expand further on their approach to identity, their work in the identity space, and support for ID 2020, which is a global alliance of governments, of NGOs, and the private sector focused on improving lives through digital identity. And both ID 2020 and Microsoft will talk about what you can do and also what resources are available to those of you who are wishing to deploy digital identification in a responsible manner. So it's my pleasure to welcome colleagues from Microsoft and ID 2020, Cameron Burge, who is the Senior Program Manager for Humanitarian Response and Innovative Technology at Microsoft, Dakota Gruner, who is the Executive Director for ID 2020, and Ankur Patel, who is the Principal Program Manager for Identity at Microsoft. I'll turn it over to Cameron to kick us off.
Great. Thank you, Layla. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you find yourself this lovely day. As Layla mentioned, my name is Cameron Burge, and I sit in Microsoft Philanthropies, where we are the business unit that is responsible for our all-up engagement in the nonprofit and humanitarian communities. And as part of that, what we look to do is how does the technology we're developing apply and impact the sector that y'all work in. And so I asked Dakota and Ankur if they could please come and speak to this crowd about the work that they're doing, because it really is a fascinating space. And I think all of us here have already been experiencing both the trials and the tribulations of identity, especially in the form of digital identity, but also see its need and value as we work and move forward. Microsoft's been doing obviously a lot of work in this space, and a lot of it's being led by a gentleman by the name of King Cameron, who, together with Ankur, are really exploring how we're going to advance. And as Kim likes to point out, he's got a great quote. The internet was built without a way to know who and what you're connected to. And well, when I was started, that was fine. It has now become a bit of an issue, and I think we can all see that in our daily lives. And so the question is now, where do we go for the next steps? How do we apply what we're calling the 7 laws of identity and now really change the way that we act in this digital environment? Because a change is required. And this is going to be based around user control and user managed information, ensuring that people understand how their information is being shared, with who, and through trusted mechanisms. And so Ankur is going to speak to that and our work and how we're advancing it. But we also know that on your side, there are resources available. Organizations are seeking digital identity solutions to apply to their programs, to make them more efficient, to actually empower the beneficiaries that you work with. And that is part of our partnership with ID 2020, which is able to come and bring those resources to the table along with that M&E framework with responsible identity, for the deployment of responsible identity solutions. So that's why we've invited these two on the call today. And with that, I'd like Dakota to please go ahead.
Hello, good morning, all of you. Thank you to NetHope for having me here today, and thank you, Cameron, Layla, for the warm introduction. I will try and go through a number of slides relatively quickly, and make sure that we have time for questions. So please do put questions into that chat. Looking forward to having a real dialogue. Let me just switch over the slides here. Okay, great. So if I leave you with nothing else today, I want to stress a few points. The first is that good digital identity is urgent and important. Identity is vital for the political, economic, and social opportunity. I think each one of you in the work that you do probably has seen the intersection of identity and your own mandates and individuals you're trying to serve. So that's the first thing. There is sort of a highly necessary moment to improve how we approach identity. Because the thing is that most of the identifications on which we currently rely are archaic, they're insecure, they lack adequate privacy protection, and for more than 1 billion people are inaccessible. So that's kind of a framing of where we're at the moment. I think just to quickly unpack what I mean when I say that identity is necessary for political and economic opportunity. I like to think of identity through the course of somebody's life. If you are unable to prove who you are, that there's a filtering and kind of a rippling effect that happens, right? If you don't have a birth registration and you go try and enroll in primary school, there's potential to be denied access to primary school, and that is true at almost every sort of turn along the way. So we cannot talk about financial inclusion without first talking about identity. We can't talk about accessing basic health care without talking about identity first. Certainly without proof of identity, individuals are without protection of the law and cannot participate as a citizen or a voter. This is both practically important, and I'd argue it's also important from a rights-based perspective. The ability to prove who you are is a fundamental human right, as set out in Article 6 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. I stress everyone and everywhere. So when we think about this, it's really about how we ensure that there is that true universal ability of individuals to prove who they are. And I would argue, and this is certainly what Cameron has already said, is that we live in a digital era. Increasingly, we live our lives online. And so even the physical lives are often intermediated by digital systems. So when we think about digital identity, we need to think not only about proving who you are in an online transaction, but having the ability to prove who you are in a mechanism that then underpins the physical interactions that we have. We are failing on multiple fronts when it comes to identity. So the first, and with credit to the World Bank for the data that they have gathered on this, over 1 billion people are unable to prove their identity. 625 million of those are children under the age of 14. About 500 million are in sub-Saharan Africa, another 360 million or so in South Asia. 230 million are children under the age of 5 who are not registered at birth. So, important thing to stress here, a lot of this is about thinking about children. I'll come back to this in a moment, but I want to plant an idea in our head. I'd argue that this is not a problem of technology, nor even a problem of delivery. Fundamentally, we think that the failure to provide everyone on the planet with an identity might be an example of market failure, where in the course of doing all of our work, we've maybe unintentionally incentivized the development of siloed and non-interoperable systems. Each organization building a beneficiary management to solve their sort of immediate service delivery needs provides real benefit. in the course of that service delivery, and yet ensures that we do end up in this kind of siloed landscape in which we now sit. This is not a problem unique to the development space. Cameron alluded to this, but there's an old joke which was published in the New Yorker in 1995, which said, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. And it's, of course, still true. So the internet was designed without any mechanism for individuals to prove their identity reliably and in a trusted manner. And the solutions that we've developed to plug this hole haven't done so well. We only need to look to the Facebook scandal that broke last year for proof, or the sort of complexity of trying to manage usernames and passwords across your digital footprint. So universally, systems of digital identity frustrate users, businesses, civil society, and governments. We think there's actually opportunity in the fact that these are sort of two convergent challenges, because you see the likes of Microsoft and others who are we're trying to solve this in a manner that is both fitting with their commercial aims, but also ensures the best for society and for the world. So what does good digital, actually before, one quick note, there's a rub. I've alluded to this, but digital identity systems carry significant risk if they're not thoughtfully designed and carefully implemented. The risks of data misuse and abuse by bad actors, by companies, governments alike, cannot be underestimated. And so we have to venture into the digital identity work with with real care. Two examples to illustrate two distinct but I think important risks. So the first is the risk of exclusion. As digital identity programs are rolled out and become more embedded in life, the risks posed by not being able to improve your identity may actually increase. So for example, in India, as the Aadhaar program was rolled out and as the government made use of your Aadhaar mandatory for access to things like food subsidies and banking, etc., those who didn't consent to biometric enrollment, those who were marginalized or excluded from the program, those who might not have been able to authenticate due to a connectivity issue at the point of an interaction, are then found themselves unable to access these critical services. So we have to think carefully about what happens when somebody isn't able to prove who they are, and if they can have mechanisms to prove who they are, multiple ways of being able to prove who they are. The second is critical privacy risks, and these are both the risks of misuse and then some of the more benign risks of correlation or of data being used in unintentional ways. So a very quick example from close to home, I live in New York City. New York City launched an identity program in 2015 to provide much-needed identity credentials to the estimated 1 million undocumented immigrants in the New York City metropolitan region. And the focus was specifically on providing an alternative to registration, potentially with the federal government, whose immigration policies even then were less accommodating. And at this point, about 1 in 8 New York City residents have an NYC ID. All of the sort of data was scanned and stored in a database in New York City. That database stored, I should be careful with this, stored almost 400,000 foreign passports, 350,000 driving licenses, thousands of birth certificates, etc. And you can imagine how sensitive that data is, and particularly how sensitive it is in the context of current conversations around immigration. And so I think what this shows is that even if we trust one organization to hold our data, administrations change, who has the keys to that data change. It's really important that we think about sort of any of the potential eventualities of how that data is stored and how it's managed. But there's good news. We do believe that if implemented thoughtfully, digital identity can empower individuals and serve as critical development infrastructure. And we have 4 different things that we identify. The first as components of good digital ID. The first is that it's persistent, that it lives with you from life to death. The second, personal, unique to you and to you only. Portable, accessible anywhere you happen to be, and usable across multiple different organizations. And private, meaning that you have permission to use data and that your privacy is protected, giving individuals real ownership and control over their own information. And if you take this model, suddenly it allows a huge number of things within the realms of each of our various organizations. So could enable health tracking across multiple different organizations and sort of eliminate some of the fragmentation of care. It could enable cash-based transfers or digital payments, et cetera. And that is what we believe could be. This is the better way that we believe we can create. But we don't think that it'll come about organically, and as a result, our work is bringing together a public-private partnership of organizations committed to user-centric, privacy-protecting, portable digital identity. We start with this ethical perspective and this long-term vision, and everything else follows. So I'd argue that at the core of what we do, we see ourselves targeting a path to a shared vision and working at two levels to ensure that we actually achieve our goals. The first is around funding and implementing high-impact pilot projects. And I will dive into this in a moment. The second is really around shaping the market, so translating our understanding of good digital identity into technical requirements and then certifying the technologies that fit these requirements. And then finally, and I guess I shouldn't undervalue this one, this is definitely the third pillar of our work, is advocating for ethical approaches to digital identity. So, sort of standing with this coalition of the willing and really sort of ensuring that this is an important topic in the advocacy agenda. The certification mark is something that we launched just recently. It was announced at Davos. And because we bring together many of the leading technical players, technology and a market-based approach really are in our DNA. And we believe that there's real value in bringing together a group. Ankur sits on this group as our technical advisory committee. So this technical advisory committee functions as a mechanism to evaluate emerging technologies, to ensure that we are translating these principles around privacy, user centricity, and portability into clear guidance for companies, and then with the certification mark, incentivizing the development of good digital identity technology. This has multiple benefits. I think as a company, it becomes easier to know where maybe the market is heading, and to differentiate a product by demonstrating that you are following best practices. If you're an implementing organization, in some ways this should help facilitate easier adoption or more confident procurement. So it becomes valuable shorthand for organizations who are trying to understand, does a digital identity technology indeed prioritize privacy, data portability, and user control. All in all, this creates a race to the top. So as certified products gain distinction, the entire market shifts towards good approaches to digital identity. And an important thing I should mention is we believe it will drive convergence on technical standards. Interoperability is vital when we think about recognition and trust. And so while we don't see our role as writing technical standards, we want to focus on building critical mass around a set of standards so that interoperability is actually realized. So that is the work that we're doing on the technical certification mark. Again, happy to answer questions on that later. On the pilot side, we support hypothesis-driven pilots that simultaneously improve lives and answer critical open questions. There are two aims in that. The first is we want to see individuals empowered with a digital identity that provides them access to the services and rights that they need. The second piece is we recognize that digital identity is a new topic, that many of the stakeholders don't have the data or the evidence they need to take these ideas to scale. And we want to ensure that the programs that we're supporting answer these open questions. This is how we see the work that we do really being taken to scale in the future. It's our perspective that ad hoc pilots run by single institutions may have limited impact and may be unsustainable and don't always advance that larger learning agenda. And so we don't think that approach necessarily works. Instead, we want to focus our pilots on generating evidence. And so we embed a common MEL framework into the design of all of the programs we support. with the aim of asking consistent enough questions across the diverse approaches and use cases to develop a really robust evidence base. And I should say we also help with partners as we're providing financial and non-financial support for any of these programs. We work to expand the ecosystem around each pilot because the value of a digital identity goes up as an individual can prove their identity in many different settings and in many different organizations. And so connecting some of those dots is really an important function that we think we can play. Something newly launched, we're focusing for the next year around 4 thematic areas where we see clusters of key open questions. I'm aware of time, so I won't kind of dive into this too much, but what we were seeing was that there were sort of interesting surfacing questions around kids, consent by children, infant biometrics, et cetera, where the benefits of digital identity might go unrealized if those questions weren't answered. And I could say the same for any of these 4 themes. And so what we're trying to do is prioritize programs that really do answer these vital open questions. We have 2 pathways for pilot development and support. Knowing that many of you here work with implementing organizations and might be interested to bring forward a pilot first, please do. We're very, very interested to engage with the pilots that you are conceiving of. And there are 2 pilots, or two pathways. The first is an online submission. So this is maybe typical, almost a grant application, although we intentionally keep it light and incredibly iterative. So, proposals are accepted on a rolling basis. First application comes into us. We engage in a long conversation with your organization to help refine that pilot. And then there's an evaluation process led by each of our 4 advisory committees. The second is partner-led development, so alliance partners collaborating to develop a proposal. And these often test the technology of one partner and its applicability in a use case proposed by another partner organization. So a mechanism for multiple organizations to come together around a specific pilot. That evaluation process is the same, and then the decision taken by our board, after which we provide both financial support, guidance around MEL, and sort of continued implementation support as well. Finally, just an illustrative pilot that we are supporting in Thailand to sort of jog all of your thinking caps. And I know that we have some of our colleagues in this pilot here on the call. Thank you to them for joining. It's been a pleasure working with iRespond and IRC teams. So this is a program providing digital identity to 35,000 camp inhabitants in a refugee camp at the Thai-Myanmar border. And the focus is on facilitating access to healthcare services and improving continuity of care between multiple different healthcare programs that the IRC operates. And some of the key questions that we're exploring in this is, does digital identity improve access to and quality of healthcare? How does one monitor that there is informed consent? And what are the opportunities that we see to expand the ecosystem such that these individuals can derive greater value from their digital identity? Finally, ID 2020 is a mechanism for transparent and inclusive governance of a very complex, rapidly evolving topic. We believe that sustained, transparent partnership is absolutely vital to make real progress on this. And what we're trying to do is promote the participation of a diverse ecosystem in these conversations. We want to ensure that it's not overly dominated by any one sector, any one perspective. This is a quick map of kind of how our advisory committees and our governance structure fit together. But really, I would, as a closing pitch, would love for your organizations to get involved. It's absolutely vital that we bring your perspectives in. So, in terms of a call to action, the first I'd say, please, if there's pilots where you're interested to collaborate, please come to us. We'd love to have a conversation. Join as an alliance partner, or if you're somebody developing an ID technology, we'd be eager to work with you around certification as well. I will pause there and thank you so much. Ankur, I'm seeing a few questions that I think may perfectly tee up where you're going to go. So without further ado, I guess I can pass it over to Ankur, who's been a close collaborator of ours as a member of the Technical Advisory Committee and a partner of Microsoft.
Thank you, Dakota. Yes, we'll be taking questions towards the end of the call, so please continue posting your questions in the chat window. Over to Ankur.
Hi, I'm not able to click on the share button. Can I get that power, please?
There we go.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. As Cameron said, or whatever time of day it is for you. My name is Ankur Patel. I'm a program manager on the identity team at Microsoft. My role on the team is to help us figure out how might we grow our identity business, if you will. Over the next few minutes, I'll walk you through some of our work with Dakota and Cameron and why we're excited about participating in NetHope around this work. This work stems from us working on identity for the last 30 years. This is the next chapter, is how we think about it. When we talk to users today, they think about their identity as a username and a password. We know it is a lot more than that. As Dakota was just telling us, in fact, it is everything we say and do in our everyday lives, from being children to grown people trying to find our ways. The issue is that those things don't belong to us. They're kind of thrown across our usernames and passwords all over the internet and devices. The net result is just endless joy, if you will. The first one, probably you have empathy in your own lives around what new joy and headline brings on what got breached today. And most of us will likely not understand its impact on our lives in coming weeks and months, if you will, or years even for that matter. And that's our personal lives. And then we go to the enterprise world, which is 16 million businesses. They run on Azure Active Directory today. That's one of the businesses I get to care about, versus 800 million monthly active users for consumers. In both of these cases, the thing that people really want is trust, is control about what I'm doing when I'm doing it. Now, compared to the third bucket, which is what Dakota painted a really emotional picture with, the first two are first world luxuries, right? And the reason Microsoft cares about it is because our mission statement is to empower every person on this planet, not the 2 billion that we have taught how to do usernames and passwords. How do we reach the other 5? And selfishly as a business, if we can solve that problem, the first two are frankly much easier. So one of the ways we have thought about this is to sign up for that challenge. If we can address this, we know we can make a lot more value in the commercial world. So what have we learned? So here's a summary slide that tells us what we've learned over the last 2 years that we've been working on this problem. And we've been disciplined about it because getting this right is critical. Trust is one of those things we earn in dribs and drabs, but you can lose it in buckets. And so we've been working slowly and methodically, not quite as fast as the world would like to see or we would like to go. But it's been important to distill these into what is the essential problem that we should be addressing as opposed to the solution. And so the problem statements that resonated with us are consumers or individuals would like to see greater privacy and control. Now it's evident from things like Facebook, their usage hasn't changed. Why is that? That's another thing that we've spent a lot of time digging into. And it comes to some of the challenges we will show, which is this trade-off between privacy, security, and ease of use. We've known time and again that people will choose ease of use or value over doing rituals to secure their privacy or security. It has real consequences, though, as evident in humanitarian space in particular. But as Dakota provided a good example around New York City having a set of immigrants' identity in a central registry, even in a country like America. We can go to European Union, where I work with a whole bunch of nation states, including the European Commission, and we think about things like GDPR, it's a good step, but not sufficient. Because from a consumer's perspective, how many of us remember what websites did we go to this year? Just 30 days in. Because if you remember which websites you went to, then pushing a GDPR button is useful. So how do we ensure that the user is in control to begin with? I won't belabor some of these points around individuals and organizations, but I'll speak a little bit more about governments for this particular audience. So we've been working with people like UN as a part of their RFP. I'll walk you through a scenario that we just submitted an RFP response for. The core work there is around how do we enable digital ID for refugees or displaced individuals. If we do so, then we achieve that last bullet outcome of social and financial inclusion for everyone. And as we just spoke, this ties back to all of us as well. This is not just a humanitarian and crisis problem, but this is becoming rapidly a challenge for most established governments around the world as well. So what does this mean for us? For Microsoft, we think that we are contributing to this problem, and we should contribute to making it better, which is augment identity services that we provide, digital identity services that we provide, to recognize the user as also a data controller. How? That boils down to this incubation hypothesis statement that we have. We believe that each of us should have a digital identity that we own and control. And us in this context is meant to be a placeholder for humans, organizations, and devices. Because unless we have integrity in the entire chain, security doesn't work, privacy does not work. We're going to start with humans, but our ambition is to then ensure that not only credentials, but also the claims, these attributes that are about your life, are also stored securely with you in a self-owned manner. But that's an apple pie motherhood statement, right? That is only meaningful if we don't have to wait for a whole new internet to be born. So one of the second sentences we sign up for as a challenge is to seamlessly integrate into our existing lives. It may take a long time for such standards to get adopted broadly, but we have to start. And if we don't start, we'll never get there. So we are investing to get started. Next few slides, I'm going to show you how the system works. And I've seen some questions go by around how centralized it is or not. So allow me to take a couple of minutes of your time to walk you through how the system may work in a decentralized manner. So BYU is a university here in America that we partnered with to demonstrate this scenario. And we partnered with a couple of decentralized ledger technology companies like Blockstack and Sovereign to show a proof of concept. But this is the same scenario that we just filled out an RFP response with the UN on, where the context is a refugee who received a scholarship endowment from UN is able to prove that education claim beyond the camp boundary, so they can go gain gainful employment beyond the camp walls. So here's how the system would work. To orient ourselves, what we are trying to do now is to empower a user to own their identity and be the issuer of their identity. Notice what it means to issue an identity for us means present some credentials, so claims or keys in this case, so they would have an app that looks like a wallet or something. There'll be an identity hub, which is where you store claims or data associated with such an identity. And then if everybody creates their own identity, how do you find them? So you need a lookup service, if you will, a DNS for this new world of the IDs, a directory service. So that's the universal resolver. In a moment, I'll describe to you pieces of this which are based on open standards and what's proprietary or otherwise. But clearly, an identity that is owned by a user cannot be built on proprietary technology. And it's absolutely not appropriate when we talk about refugees and displaced individuals. By definition, their identity cannot be anchored on some proprietary technology based out of one sovereign nation, if you will. So our intention is for this to be based on open standards and open source solutions. So in our scheme, we're saying this identity stack is chain agnostic, this distributed ledger technology agnostic. And depending on your scenario, you would trust something like a Bitcoin as an open chain, or Sovereign, or Ethereum more consortium based, or bring your own chain that could be completely proprietary and closed in an enterprise, or based for a humanitarian world, whatever that might be. That is one of the key lessons we've learned from doing identity for the past 30 years and people like Kim Cameron contributing to it, to say, eventually, the world wants to work with each other. So design for that. It doesn't mean that you're identifiable, you're addressable is what we're after. So here's how the system works. Alice is one such student. She can use this application that Microsoft provides based on standards to generate a key that's stored locally on her phone. Now, I understand in some of the regions you're talking about, you may not have smartphones. It may be feature phones. It may not be phones at all. And that's one of the reasons we're signing up for this challenge, to say, how might we make it work in even harder environments? Because if we can make it work there, then we can make it in commercial world. But for our conversation's sake, let's imagine there's a place where you can store these keys. So Alice can now use these keys to talk to the world. So the only thing that's stored on the blockchain, if you will, is a public key and an identifier, so that you can address them and challenge them to say, can you please prove possession of this? Now Alice can sign in using her existing credentials. These existing credentials in UN case or a humanitarian case could be based on in-person proofing. But for this purpose, this was a student in Jordan University who was able to sign in using her existing EDU credentials, ask for a digital diploma, and the university is able to request a identifier to whom this should be addressed. Alice is able to present a pairwise identifier. So this is not a super cookie or something that the university can now track all these people. This is a per relationship identifier that's generated now. Think of it as a burner email address that you might use. I use it for signing up for random services on the internet, but I'm lazy, so I use the same Gmail address everywhere, and now I'm correlatable. In this case, by default, to ensure privacy by design and data minimization, a pairwise identifier is shared. I'll skip this slide for the minute. Notice how the university has a purple key. So they can issue a claim after looking up against that EDU credential, or in your case, an existing line of business credential, a diploma or a claim signed to Alice. First new thing happens, which is Alice is, instead of asking for consent of Alice to release on her behalf this information, the university is asking for permission to store this information. So if Alice says yes, then this claim is stored with her, not on a blockchain or anything, but on her phone or in her PC or in a cloud. It could even be a shared PC or a device, if you will. But it's tied to her biometric or her PIN in order to access that claim. It's signed with her cryptography. What this empowers Alice to do now is to present this claim independently to anyone in the world. Three new things happen. A recipient of this claim can now independently verify who was the issuer of this claim. They don't have to blindly trust Alice. They know it was somebody with a purple key. They can use their own universal resolver to go find out who was that issuer. They can know who presented this claim. It was somebody with a green key. And they can know the current status of this claim. Are they currently a refugee? Are they currently eligible for aid? Or are they currently vaccinated for something? These are the kinds of ideas that are now possible in almost real time while preserving users' privacy and security. So this work is possible based on a key set of principles. The system is designed for having a user to have more than one DID, and you can choose to disclose as much or as little as a business process requires. So governments may need to know you in entirety, and there are other contexts in which you don't need to disclose all of your life. These are resolvable across chains. It is strongly rooted on the idea that the user is the one who's managing these permissions, managing of these claims, but it's stored locally on devices, and it can sync to the clouds, if you will, where it's not just a Microsoft technology stack, therefore. You can sync it to a escrow cloud run by NetHope, for example, or Amazon or Google or home PCs and data centers, for all that matter. We're doing work with existing standards community like OIDC, FIDO, etc., to make sure that this scheme is compatible with existing line of business applications. And again, in fullness of time, I will gladly go into details with you about this stuff. To summarize, a lot of these pieces are in development now. You are going to get a copy of this slide and a pointer to a white paper which describes all of what I'm describing in far more detail. We are participating in an industry group called Decentralized Identity Foundation. I'll give you a URL to their website shortly. And there's a community group, W3C, which is driving standards around the identifiers themselves, making it possible for you to bring different kinds of distributed ledger systems, if you will. Some of the things we're working on next. It's very hard for normal people to understand usernames and passwords, let alone all these crazy things that I just described to you, including thinking about different literacy levels or lack thereof. So we need to design a system that is far more robust. So we're spending a lot of time on ease of use. There's a lot of details in here around recovery, revocation, what happens when I lose my cell phone or device, how do I recover it. In fullness of time, again, I'll gladly spend more time talking about it. The next key pillar here is performance and scale. If you rely on large distributed systems on how consensus is built, then we need a mechanism by which you would be able to scale this. So we're inventing a new protocol here that allows you to scale this to thousands of transactions per second. Microsoft's ambition is to make it open source and do that contribution in the next 30 to 60 days. And the last one I always ask any community that is interested in this idea is to go join the Decentralized Identity Foundation. We are a founding member of that work as well. There are more than 80 companies that are part of it now. Some of them are large brand names that you may recognize. That's a quick whirlwind tour. To learn more about our work, you can go to this website. You have our contact info. Please ping any one of us. But we are incredibly thrilled to be part of ID 2020 just for that reason, that it provides a precipice in which our ideas can be tested. Because ultimately, we have to get this right. There's no point in rushing through this unless we get it right. So we are incredibly thankful for Dakota and her team to allowing us to be a member of ID 2020, and then opportunities like Cameron making it possible to connect with communities like NetHope or Gates Foundation or UN, so that we can make sure that this thing works in real world and not just technology for the sake of technology. So thank you very much for this opportunity to connect to you, and I look forward to Q&A session.
Great. Thank you so much, Ankur. Thank you, Dakota and Cameron. We are getting ready to start with a Q&A. Couple of notes. One, yes, we are recording and will make the recording and the slides and the contact information available to all of you via our NetHope Solutions Center, and you'll be receiving an email. Second, do continue posting your questions in the chat window. So we'll take the next about 15 minutes or so to go through the questions that we have so far. And I'll actually start with Dakota, coming back to your overview of the pilots. If you can expand on how many pilots you plan to have or to support each year, specifically this year, if you can elaborate on what kind of support pilots get and what resources, meaning training or technical experts, are available broadly, so even to those who are not participating in the pilots.
Yeah, thank you. And I apologize. I understand that my audio has been a little bit difficult to make out. I'm traveling at the moment, so doing the best I can from far away. In terms of the number of pilots that we plan to support this year, it's our intention to support at least 12 programs this year. So of those, we anticipate 4 of them being large alliance-led pilots, so 1 for each of the themes that I outlined earlier. And the remainder we anticipate coming through the pilot solicitation pathway that I mentioned on our website. And there's information at www.apply.id2020.org if you want further detail about that pilot solicitation and then the evaluation processes. A thing that I should note about our approach to pilots and the evaluation of them is that we've built really robust mechanism to evaluate potential pilots. So we have 4 different advisory committees. I sort of breezed through this on the last slide. But we have a technical advisory committee on which Ankur participates and which produced the certification mark. We also have a program delivery advisory committee, an ethics and risks advisory committee, and an ecosystem and advocacy advisory committee. And the way that we go about evaluating potential programs for support is that each of those committees have developed a set of evaluation criteria distinct for their respective kind of areas of focus. And so we have each pilot evaluated by each of the 4 different advisory committees, such that the ones that we support really are very rigorously designed programs. As I said, rigorous M&E embedded into the design of the project, assurances that the technology that is being used is in fact good digital identity tech, that it fits with the requirements outlined in the certification mark, and the use case itself is one where both the pilot can be feasible, but where it will have significant impact. And what we've heard is that actually becomes an incredibly effective almost stamp for those programs. And so we actually have a number of donors who said, they sort of provide the clearinghouse function, if you will, for good digital identity projects. So I think the thing I should note is that while we've set a target of 12 programs this year, if we have many more applications and those applications make it through that process, donors seem quite excited to support the pilots that have kind of cleared through all of those processes, and we think that we can help facilitate funding for more than 12 programs. So in terms of the support that we offer financial support for the implementation of a digital identity program. We offer access to essentially the network of the ID 2020 Alliance to revise your pilot concept. So that's both in the technical and non-technical aspects. Mentioned this a few times, but work around monitoring evaluations, so support to embed this very rigorous set of M&E questions into the design of the pilot. I should note, the intent is not there to belabor, to make it incredibly difficult to actually run the programs, but just to make sure that we, in the most efficient way possible, we're answering open questions. And then to get to your last question around what resources are available to those not doing pilots, I think it's a handful. First, we host events, we host meetings to bring the community together. I think those provide both, access to technical experts, to non-technical experts, moments where we can kind of do training and knowledge sharing. We also have, within the alliance itself, sort of a mechanism for knowledge sharing and for participation. So I sort of say there are three categories of participation. There's participation as an alliance partner, where you're really saying, I want to be involved in setting the future course of digital identity and participate in the governance mechanism. There's discrete engagement around a pilot, around certification of a technology. And then I think there's a sort of third category of engagement where effectively we bring you into a community of people thinking a lot about digital identity and help to hopefully facilitate context and knowledge sharing.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dakota. We'll make sure to also follow up on some of these modalities of participation in the follow-up email and slides. Lots of excellent questions, so I'll try to group them and we can tackle as many as possible on this call. So there's a set of questions around governments. I'll share a few, and then Dakota, Ankur, and Cameron let you answer. So how do these initiatives interface with governmental or intergovernmental processes and the frequent need for state authorities to regulate data and data jurisdiction? So that's one related to, again, interfacing with governments. And then how willing are governments to introduce this type of identity system? And there's a comment, doesn't this just move data storage from the government to the private sector?
So this is Ankur Patel from Microsoft. We've been working with a number of governments and pan-government agencies like European Union around this. The key thing we have to understand here is that it doesn't move to private sector, it moves to the individual. Our role in this technology stack is not one of a service provider, but is a technology provider. I'm giving you a tool, and you are the sole data controller of these claims. So some of as you can imagine around the world, the different governments are in different states, where some are going to say, my role as a government is to issue a claim that you are a citizen or not a citizen, or you're a criminal or not, or whatever they want to attest to. But your identity is yours. There are other schemes, that's on one extreme, right? The other thing in the middle would be something like Aadhaar or EIDAS in Europe, where that is a national ID or pan-national ID system, and it can be connected to an identity that you own and control, in which case you get to say, I am this person, but as endorsed by this government, because otherwise it's just a self-attested claim. It doesn't really mean anything. So for such a world to be born, you're still going to need a claim from someone that says you are who you say you are. Otherwise, it's just me making up I'm king of Timbuktu, right? So the system is meant to allow that interoperability, yet recognize that each of us gets to make very specific claims about what you are issuing, what you're presenting, and we all have a role to play in it. As opposed to today's world, all of that is overloaded by one entity, and that's typically a technology provider or a government, if you will. So the idea here is to recognize the user also, or the citizen also, as a data controller for some of these things, but that data lives with you. That's critical. And that's how portability would work, therefore, right? Because you are you, just like in real life. But a facet of you is what you choose to expose in a healthcare-related scenario or a humanitarian scenario or a financial or education scenario. But only you get to make that determination. You are the one who stitches it together, not some agency out there. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Ankur. It does, and I'd be curious to hear from Dakota, given the governments are part of the alliance.
Yeah. So I'll pick up where Ankur left off and then kind of circle back, I think, to the question. I mean, I think an important thing to note in what he just said is that this isn't presenting a world in which governments or others don't have the databases that they have. So there was a question asked earlier around, should we build on legacy databases or start fresh? And I think the principle here is, two things. Data remains at source. Individuals are the sole actor able to aggregate their own personal data. But this is not suggesting that sort of governments or others no longer collect or manage data about their citizens or their clients or whomever. We do believe it facilitates data minimization so that you don't end up with every organization collecting sort of the thick file of information on somebody, because they can rely on a credential that the individual's been able to share, and as a result don't need to develop that thick file of information. So the idea is, I think that we are certainly building on systems. We're avoiding the necessity of getting to interoperability by building point-to-point data sharing agreements, and shifting that locus of control to the individual. In terms of government involvement in ID 2020 and sort of the appetite of governments broadly, I think that we're seeing the first movers now who are saying that this is the model that they are very excited by. There are countries who are very much exploring these models and starting to adopt them, most at sort of the piloting phase at the moment. But I think what we're seeing is that even countries where this may be a bit more of a stretch, they are wrestling with this challenge of how do you simultaneously improve access to services, be able to play the role that a government should play, and do so in a way that protects privacy. Even if you're just considering the potential cybersecurity risk, individuals, I think governments are very concerned with, the potential for outside hackers to somehow, do ill with centralized databases. And so, it's an emerging conversation, but really, I think, gratifying to see that, governments of sort of, from across the world, and I should note, not just national governments, municipal, state, provincial, et cetera, governments who are all wrestling with these topics, and I think many landing, with a focus on user centricity and privacy.
Thank you, Dakota. I'll move us to the next set of questions that are around access, since we have about 4 minutes left, and I'm going to group them. So first, a comment on this discussion. Great session. Kudos to Microsoft for rising to this challenge. Thank you for a comment. So in terms of the access, there are two things. One is around, in the instance, as a refugee, without a consistent device across geographies or time, how do I access digital identity? So, for example, in a refugee camp in Myanmar, a UN camp in Bangkok, a government office in the U.S. And then there's a related question. Digital literacy and phone penetration is poor in a number of those countries. How do you address that so we're not increasing exclusion?
Yeah. This is Ankur from Microsoft again. That is the challenge that we have to strive for, right? And therefore, we have to support a variety of devices which may be owned by an individual or they are shared devices in some of these regions. We'll have to support offline use of these technologies as well as one where verification is possible online. And this is where we are doing work with mobile operators and telco providers to device manufacturers, all the way down the layer cake, if you will, including thinking about new modality of devices, which could be rings or necklaces or something else. We have to design it in a manner that it doesn't become a mechanism to identify or target, right? So this problem space is fraught with design challenges in addition to technical ones. We feel confident about being able to solve the technical ones. The harder ones are the design challenges around this. And we have theories of these, and our intention is to participate in pilots to get real-world feedback around it. To the degree the community is interested in these, we would love help around it, whether it's just research and feedback, to validation, to if you have ideas on how we could go about it. But this is going to take all of us to work together. But the intention is to make it possible that we don't have to rely on you having the latest, greatest iPhones or Android phones. It has to be possible where we are without a device and yet be able to prove our identity, because that's where most of us will start.
Thank you, Ankur. Dakota, anything else to add based on the pilots you're working on?
You know, I think that Ankur did a great job in summarizing that. I mean, I think it's, this is exactly why these feedback loops and sort of, I think we believe the alliance model is so important, right, is identifying when, approaches to, approaches that are, maybe some of them are technical, some of them are non-technical, but around access, around how you overcome connectivity issues or lack of a device. We want to ensure that we're kind of feeding that back into both technical development and then our sort of beliefs about how we take this to scale.
Great, thank you. So inviting feedback and collaboration from this community. Just one question too, we briefly touched on portability. I do want to make sure that we answer this question clearly. Does the certification mark cover portability of identity? So identity that is portable across the services. We talked about health, we talked about financial, education, and so on.
Very, very short answer, since we're right up at the hour, yes. We wanted to talk about portability and embed that into the certification mark, not just in the sense of interoperability, but in the sense of recognition and trust. So when, if you look through the technical requirements that sit behind the certification mark, it goes at it both from the perspective of, reliance on open standards, et cetera, but how, also you engender trust in the credentials issued and across lots of institutions.
Great, thank you, Dakota. I'd like to thank our presenters, Cameron Burge, Dakota Gruner, and Ankur Patel, for joining us this morning and discussing this very important and complex topic. If you have any additional questions, you'll have the opportunity to continue that conversation as a follow-up to this webinar. We will be sharing the recording, and we'll also share the contact information and the slides. Over to you, Madeline, for a reminder about the Solutions Center poll.
Yes, thank you for your attendance today. We very much appreciate it. Once you close out your WebEx event, another window will pop up with a WebEx survey. We'd like you to take just a moment to provide your feedback about today's webinar. We very much appreciate it, and we hope to make our webinar series better by your feedback. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, team, for organizing. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.